Okay, I'm back to talk about yesterday's video where I gave very quick and dirty definitions of transgender, transsexual, and transvestite. Now, when I'm doing a short video, I'm trying to compress everything into a very short length of time so people who are just scrolling through the video get as much of the message as possible before they scroll on past. So the context that gets missed with a definition like that is that a definition is not absolute. No one can define you except you. And I also do want to apologize. The definition I gave of transsexual, I do not have the textbook that I read that definition in The Psychology of Human Sexuality by Justin Lehmiller, 2024 edition. I do not recall how he worded it. That was what I took from his definition. However, one of the books that I refer to most on the subject of sex and gender, Sex, Gender, Biology in a Social World by Anne Fausto Sterling, originally published in 2012, does not give a strict definition of transsexual. However, the closest the author gets to defining it is someone who wants to be the other sex, which is rather binary, but still not medicalist. And I apologize that the way I defined it was medicalist. And for those who don't know, transmedicalism is a school of thought that states that if you are transgender, you must get the surgery, you must become the opposite gender. And there has been a huge, understandable backlash against that school of thought in recent years because, as I keep saying, no one else can define you. All you need to be transgender is to realize that you are and to choose that label for yourself. Okay, sorry for the hasty edit, popping in here to add something else in. One of the reasons that transmedicalism got so deeply ingrained in the world of transsexual/transgender people is a set of guidelines that were published under the name of Harry Benjamin. Now, Benjamin himself was not strictly transmedicalist, but the guidelines that bore his name were. They included provisions like if someone who was a man, or at least perceived by society to be a man, who wanted to be a woman, before they received any kind of treatment, hormones, anything surgical, anything at all, they had to live as a woman for 2 years. They had to dress as a woman. That was the main thing. It was all about clothing. If you showed up somewhere in jeans and a t-shirt, you were in danger of losing your right to receive treatment. You probably couldn't even go out with the boys to the hockey game. Thankfully, that has changed. The guidelines that are used in Canada, for example, the Rainbow Health Network in Ontario publishes guidelines that simply, if someone expresses a sincere desire to be who they really are, and if that it means a change in their gender presentation, gender identity, or physical makeup, if that's what they want, then give it to them, because it's alleviating distress. And as I said in the previous video, gender dysphoria, being the distress of being the wrong person, can only be successfully treated by some form of transition. Now, back to the video where I cut out of it. Okay, another jump cut, another thing I forgot to put in to the video in the first take, transvestite. That term, it literally means one who dresses opposite. Now, that does bring up questions, because if someone dressed as a woman when they were perceived to be a man, at the time, did they consider themselves to be a man who dressed as a woman, even though they were later to discover that they were a trans woman all along? like I keep talking about labels, and only you can define your labels. Back in my old life, before I realized who I was, I did not define myself as a man. That word always felt jarring. I hated having the word man applied to me. I didn't consider myself to be a woman because physically I was not. I just thought of myself as a person who was not really a legitimate person in a sense of, yeah, I still have a lot to unpack there. Back to the main video. Because if there's one message I want you to take from my channel, the most important thing I'm saying is that no one else can define you. You define yourself. You choose the labels that apply to you, and as you change, because we all do, you decide which labels you want to discard, which you want to keep, and which new ones you want to adopt. It's your decision, and no one can tell you how to define yourself. Not your doctor, not me here on this channel, not the Nancy Duke Lewis Professor of Biology and Gender Studies at Brown University, a leading expert on the subject. I trust her judgment as somebody who has done considerable research in that area, but she doesn't define me, and she sure as hell shouldn't define you either. However, I do want to read a little bit from the end of the book because I like the way she concludes. I highly recommend this book. Please search it out, get it. Even though it is now 13 years old, it is the best book on the subject I have read from a scientific biological standpoint. The conclusion, as she writes it, do sex and gender have a future, or, as some fear, will gender disappear? A quick Google search of the phrase gender-free brings up links to gender-free writing, raising a child gender-free contra dancing, and, with a perverse switch of word order, baby gender predictor. Clearly, there is interest in eliminating gender distinctions from at least some parts of our culture. Yet I doubt that we face a genderless future. Interest in sex and reproduction remains strong, and unless we achieve one of the feminist utopias in which reproduction becomes a neutral technology, partnering and having babies will continue to anchor some forms of sex and gender differentiation. But I do believe that individual gender variation will become better recognized and more acceptable. Gay marriage will become the law of the land, and many degrees of transgender will become socially unremarkable. The day may come when we don't have to designate male or female on our driver's licenses or passports, allowing people with gender presentations that don't match their natal sex the possibility of a freer existence. And if much of this comes to pass, it is certain to feed back onto the development of gender in infants and children. Of all the points emphasized in this book, the one that needs most urgently to seep into people's ways of thought is that bodies are not bounded. To understand sex and gender, we have to study how sensory, emotional, and motor experience becomes embodied. We will learn a lot about the science of sex and gender in years to come, but to the extent that our social settings and thus experiences change, at least some of the subtleties of sex and gender will remain a moving target. This should keep life interesting and keep scientists employed, if not out of trouble. Once again, pick this up if you haven't read it already. And once again, sorry for being as brief and superficial as I was on my definitions yesterday. To repeat my primary message, you define yourself. No one else does. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.